So I had a couple tough classes I took when I was in seminary getting my master's. I took a class called The Problem of Evil and Suffering. So just at the title, that was not the most pleasant class to go through, but something we needed to talk about, so evil and suffering. I took that in my undergrad. I've shared before I was a political science major for my undergrad. And I took an environmental policy class. I liked policy, but let's just say the environment at that time in my life was not real high up the ladder, but I needed an elective. It was taught by my advisor, who was a good teacher, and I liked him. So I took it, and it was really hard because there was that part of me, the young, 21, 22-year-old that was like, I don't care about this. But then I took it, and I tried to learn. I did well, and I actually learned a lot. I don't know what my grade was. Probably wasn't great, but that was college. But I learned a lot. I had to get through a tough class, had to go through the process of learning things and talking about it in order to learn. Now, I asked that today because our topics for today from the Sermon on the Mount from Jesus are not exactly the easiest ones to always talk about. We talk about this as we just got started. Some topics are kind of nicer and fun to talk about, some less. So today, we're going to talk about adultery and divorce. We don't want to avoid them. We want to learn from what Jesus says. Now, to get us started, some of you have experience with both of these two topics in some way, shape, or form, whether it's yourselves, your family, people you know. There is absolutely zero judgment from me or anybody here about anything that has happened. All right, what I want to do is look at what Jesus says and just see what we can learn from it and what he's really getting at. All right, so that's what we want to do today, is really see what does Jesus say, all right, what is he really getting at, what does he mean, and what can we today do with that. And I think when we look at adultery and divorce, we really need to look at desire and respect. So the point today will be to desire God and respect God. All right, we're going to look at adultery and divorce separately, but I do think they play into each other a little bit, so we're going to tie them in to one message today. But the big thing being, we need to desire God and respect God. So let's read. We're going to look at the passage in Matthew. So again, still in Matthew chapter 5. We're in chapter 5 for a few more weeks yet. We're going to look at 5:27 through 30. That'll be our first section. It'll be right up here behind me, or if you're using your Bibles or phones or anything like that, as always, I'm in the NIV translation. Again, these slides also will be up on our website with the video of the sermon later today, tomorrow. So you can see any of that if you missed it. All right, well, let's read what Jesus has to say on adultery, Matthew 5:27 through 30. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Okay, so Jesus starts this off very similarly to last week and how he's going to do it in the future, which is, you have heard, but I say to you. So he's referencing back to what they've learned from the law, from the Torah that we talked about a few weeks ago. So what did they learn? Well, Exodus 20:14, in one of the commandments says, you shall not commit adultery. So that's what they've heard. Also, Jesus talks about, going after somebody's wife. That is from Exodus 20:17, which says to not covet your neighbor's wife, amongst other things. Now, these two both have to do with actual actions, the act of doing something. And that's the law that Jesus is saying, you have heard this. All right? Actually committing adultery, having relations with someone other than your spouse. And coveting really being about theft, leading you to steal. Those are the kind of the things that Jesus is saying you've heard. But like last week with murder, Jesus intensifies this one. Last week with murder, he went to anger. This week, his intensification is really about desire. All right? Because what he's saying is that the adultery really starts in the heart. It's sexual relations and purity begin with the desires in our heart. So it comes with desire. That internal desire leads to an improper action. And as Christians, our desires really need to be rooted in the love of Jesus Christ. There's no desire without love. So when we desire after someone we're not married to, that's lust and not love. Lust is something that does not honor God. It doesn't reflect who God is, and it leads to behavior that does not glorify God. James 1:15 says, after desire has conceived, so desire first, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. But it starts with desire. If we look at the story of David in 2 Samuel, He desired Bathsheba first before he had relations with her. So it starts with desire. And that's why I think Jesus says what he does in verse 28 about doing it in his heart, looking at a woman lustfully. But then in verses 29 and 30, he talks about, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, or your right hand, cut it off. This is an illustration. And he probably uses the right hand and the right eye. Those would have been known as the more dominant ones. So probably the bigger deal is why he's using the right. Now, I don't think Jesus is literally saying to gouge out your eye or cut off your hand. But if you think about eyes for a second, what are your eyes? They're guides, right? I stand here and I don't trip over this stand that's holding my iPad because I can see it. My eyes guide me, all right? But if my eyes, however, are filled with dirt or with mud and they're clouded, I trip over it right into it. Right? That's kind of what Jesus is getting at, all right? It's a radical approach, but if your eyes are getting clouded by things and your heart is getting clouded by things, it leads to stumbling and falling. So he's saying it really takes what would probably be more of a radical approach to fix it. So I was thinking about this. When we think about making changes in our lives, a lot of times there's two ways to go about it. You have, first off, what might be known more as like a smaller and incremental change. And a lot of people use this for making changes to health and wellness lifestyles. I think it's really, really smart for that, right? Like, I'm going to go to the gym one more day a week this month, or I'm going to cut out just this type of food for the month, or I'm going to walk this much more, or something. I'm going to get an hour more sleep. You change one small thing each bit and kind of slowly get things better. That's a great approach for something like that. But what Jesus would say with this is it needs to go the other way. It needs to be something radical. It needs to be a straight up cut out, get rid of this that leads to these wrong desires. That's what Jesus is getting at. It takes more of a radical approach, which is why he talks about, hey, just cut off the hand, because it's not helping you. It's taking you where you shouldn't go. All right, so what are we supposed to do with this? Well, we need to address it. All right, we can't just put this in the back of our minds, because lustful attraction is not going away. You always find people attractive in a variety of ways, right? There's physical, there's some people find humor attractive, intelligence attractive. It doesn't matter. So it's about what we are going to do with it. And I want to stress that point, because it is not about somebody else. It's often, you'll hear the complete garbage line from guys, well, if she just didn't dress that way, I wouldn't be attracted to her like that. No, that's absolutely the wrong way of thinking about it. It is inside, it is on us, all right? Women, if that guy wasn't wearing that bro tank and flexing so much, I wouldn't be attracted to him, or anything like that. If they just weren't so funny, right? Hey, stop being funny, because that's attractive and I might stumble. Hey, stop being so dang smart, because I find intelligence attractive and that causes me to stumble. That's ridiculous, right? It is. It's an internal thing, and that's what Jesus says, because if you look at his words, he says, for the man that's committed it in his own heart, it's on us to deal with it. It is not on somebody else, right? It's an inward thing. So what do we need to do? Focus on our desires, right? If desires are the issue, focus on it. So where does your mind go when you find someone attractive in any way? Now, as you figure this out and honestly look at it, you might need to make some practical changes, right? It might be remove certain shows that you watch, remove movies or websites or people you follow on social media. And it's really difficult with social media and all the platforms where you can follow people. But maybe you need to remove them at least till you get that mind right. Basically, don't continue to go to a place that causes you to stumble. I think about this with people that have issues with drinking. Usually a bar is not a great place for them to keep going, because it can cause them to stumble. Similarly here, if there's things you're seeing or places you're going that cause that, we may need to eliminate those. And those are going to be different for everybody. Second piece, accountability. We use that word quite a bit in churches. Having accountability partner, accountability groups. Basically, it's getting somebody else involved, because this issue right here with wrong desires, lustful desires in our hearts is really hard to deal with alone, all right? It's hard to deal with alone, so you get somebody that you trust to talk about, and get somebody that you do really trust, because you gotta be honest. Share your struggles, but be honest. There's no gray area with this. It's not like, well, I could kind of go this far into the show and then maybe that. No, there's no gray. It's this is what I can do, this is what I can't. And you bring somebody in to talk about with that, to be able to confess those stumbles when you have them. Confess the stumbles, but then celebrate the victories. All right, so bringing somebody else in can be really helpful and really important. And thirdly, desire God daily. Go to God more than you ever have about things maybe you've never gone to God about before. What do I mean by this? Basically, constantly and consistently go to God about things. Spend time with him. Make him the desire. Drive yourself to desire. The more we drive toward God, the more we include God, the more we will desire God, and he becomes the focus of our desires, and this other stuff we shouldn't be desiring gets dwindled down. So desire God daily, and I think that helps with dealing with lust. Desire God first, desire God often, desire God only. All right, so that's the desire piece, and I think that's really at the heart of Jesus' teaching on adultery, is that it starts with desire internally. So that's kind of the adultery piece. But then he gets into divorce. And divorce is another really difficult topic. It's handled very differently within the span of churches and just people. You very possibly have heard different teachings on it than what I'm going to say. That's okay. And again, any experience you have with divorce, again, there's zero judgment from me. Many people have had experiences, whether it's themselves or family members or friends that are divorced. We're just going to try to learn what Jesus has to say about it. And this was actually one that was interesting for me to study and learn about some more. And I want to cite a commentary I used because he had some really good ideas that helped me wrap my mind around it. A guy named Scott McKnight wrote the Story of God Bible commentary, which I used for this a lot. And it was really helpful, so I'm going to use some of his ideas, how we can look at these two verses on divorce and really wrap our heads around what Jesus is getting at. So we're going to read the passage. It's just two verses to start with, Matthew 5:31 through 32. Let's see what Jesus says, see what we can take a look at. It's been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. All right, so he talks about divorce, but I really think in the end, he's getting at more about marriage, because we can't have divorce without marriage. All right, so we're going to kind of look at both pieces. We're going to look at divorce, but then really look at marriage. Now, quickly, to any people watching or here that are not married, I do not see a biblical mandate anywhere that says you have to get married. All right, so just because we talk about marriage and it's in the Bible, I don't see anything that says you have to be married to be a Christian. But I do believe that if you get married, there's some stuff in the Bible we need to take and learn about our marriages and understanding that our marriage is from God. So what I want to do to help us out is read actually Matthew 19:3 through 8, because Jesus gets challenged again by the Pharisees in this section. We've talked before, the Pharisees would try to trap Jesus or ask him questions to see what he would say, and they ask him about divorce. And he gives a little more info in this passage. So I want to read this. It'll be up here. It's Matthew 19:3 through 8. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. Okay, so Jesus says man and woman were brought together under God as one flesh. So what we're getting at is that marriage is from God and is this covenantal relationship between a husband and wife. So covenant being like a promise between the husband and wife. Now, it's not so dissimilar from a covenant relationship we have with God. And this is where the author of that commentary kind of chimed in and said, you know, with God we have this relationship where God is for us, God is with us, and God is really, in essence, concerned about our eternal future and our salvation. And that should be similar promises that we have with our spouses. That's what our marriage covenant should look like. Somebody being for us, being with us. And that was never designed by God to be broken or taken lightly. He says, you know, let no one break this apart. What Jesus says is human hearts get hard. Human hearts get sinful. And that covenant gets broken. So when that covenant gets broken, I think that is when we kind of get into grounds for divorce. I'm not going to give any sort of exhaustive list for what constitutes biblical divorce or anything like that, because I don't think divorce is necessarily mandatory if the covenant is broken. Reconciliation, if possible in a marriage, should be first. And what a testimony to God reconciliation can be. We're reconciled and redeemed in Christ, so marriages can be reconciled and redeemed. That's not always possible, I get that. But if it's possible, that's what I think Jesus would have us work towards. But, as Jesus would say, and I think as we look at the Bible and who God is, divorce does have permissions. Jesus talks about adultery. That is a person in the marriage not being for their spouse. That would break the covenant. All right? Breaking that covenant and promise to be for you, I believe, also includes abuse. That is physical, emotional, mental abuse. I believe repetitive or habitual abuse is not being for you and is breaking the covenant of marriage. All right? Also being completely deserted. The stories of my spouse just up and left and was gone. Well, they're not being with you. Right? That breaks part of that covenant. And I bring those up because there are times when this passage, when Jesus only references adultery, has been used by abusers to tell the abuse victims that, well, you can't divorce me. I didn't cheat on you, or I didn't do this. You have to stay with me. And I think that is very, very wrong. Right? I believe abuse is sinful, and that is breaking a marital covenant. Right? And that would be a reason you could leave the marriage. I want that to be something, because some will take this as it's only adultery. I don't necessarily totally agree with just that. All right? So that's kind of the divorce piece. But Jesus brings up divorce because the marriage covenant was being broken, and I really think marriage is more of Jesus' point with this passage. All right? So, well, okay, Jeff, if marriage is the point, why does he talk more about divorce? Because divorce was happening very frequently and much too easily in Jesus' day. And I think that's still the case today. There's the old Jackie Kennedy quote that says you marry the first time for love, second for money, third for companionship. That's like basically saying divorce was expected, or you anticipated divorce. That's not how God designed marriages. All right, in Jesus' day, certificates of divorce could be given for anything a woman did to become displeasing to her husband. Old rabbis would joke, kind of not joke, saying, if the woman burned dinner, that would be grounds for him to say, I'm displeased. Here's a certificate of divorce. We'll get divorced. That is the kind of stuff that makes Jesus want to address it. He's like, that is not grounds for divorce. That's not why we should be breaking what God has given us. In essence, Jesus is saying divorce is disrespectful to the marriage covenant that God has given. So I think Jesus is getting at we need to respect marriage more. Take it seriously. Don't go into marriage thinking that divorce is coming. So how do we respect marriage more? How do we respect marriages? First off, I think we remember that it is from God. God gave us marriage. That's what Jesus referenced in that passage. And anything that God created is good and is meant for good and is not to be destroyed or taken advantage of. So remember that God gave us marriage. Second part, strengthen, grow it, keep it healthy. Not so dissimilar from our bodies. We want to strengthen our bodies, keep our bodies healthy. The same way, strengthen and grow marriages. Now that looks different for every marriage, okay? But strengthen and grow it. And then third, work through the difficulties. Work through the little spats, right? Don't give up. When Stacy and I were first married, we lived in a duplex in Middleton, and we only had a one-car garage. So we'd leave one car, and if we would go somewhere, we would have our second car parked in the driveway. Now, for some reason, our little disagreements or fights always happened in the car. Like, they happened coming home from somewhere, we'd be talking about things. So we had to deal with each other, that we sat in the driveway, in the car, and hashed it out before we went inside. So we're like out in the driveway sitting there. I'm pretty sure I remember one being like an hour. We had disagreements over a ton of things. Some were actually even about church and what was going on, because we were both involved. But we would sit there and we would hash it out. We wouldn't give up on it. So work through whatever the difficulties are and not giving up. God doesn't give up on us. So if marriage is from God, we shouldn't just give up on marriages either. I think that's how we can respect our marriages more, and that's what Jesus wants us to do. Are there reasons a marriage can and should end? Yes, we addressed some of those before. But reconciliation should also be the goal if it's possible. We have a covenant and a promise from God. He respects that covenant with us, and we should respect our marriages in that way because we have that covenant with our spouse. He gave us marriage. So if we're in a marriage, respect it like we respect God. So this week, I always try to give you something to think about for the week. Focus on your desires first, going back to that first section. What do you desire? Where does your mind go when you find things attractive? Where do the desires go? Are there things you need to remove from your life to help with that? Is there someone that you trust that you can bring in, kind of in the sense of accountability? I would encourage you to take that step if you can do that. Bring them in to help address it. And then grow your desire for God. Spend time like we talked about, just constant and consistent time with God. If it's like, oh, this little thing is going on, pray about it. Talk to God about it. Get that relationship flowing more. And then show respect to God. Whether you're married or not, we can all respect what God has given us. All right, the gifts that God has given us. So show respect to God through those gifts. If you're married, think about how you can respect, grow, and strengthen your marriage this week. But overall, I would encourage us all to really desire God and respect God this week. All right, let's pray. God, we thank you for these words, God, just what Jesus had to say. As difficult as these topics can be, God, and experiences people have had with them. But God, I pray that we'd still be able to grow from them, God, to heal from any of the past that have to do with them, and to grow and set our desires on you, God. I pray that we would just desire you, that you would really convict us and put on each of our hearts the desires that we need to remove, or the things we need to remove so that our desires don't go where they should. And God, I pray that each of us would really just come to you more frequently this week about anything and everything, God, just to grow the relationship and grow our desires with you. And God, I pray we would all take stock of the gifts that you've given, God, whether it's marriage or something else, and that we would respect you by respecting those gifts, that we would use them well, that we would strengthen and grow those and show our respect to you. So God, again, we thank you for these words, God, and for meeting us here this morning. In your name.